Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Bhajana Yashodanandana Bhajana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Jana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha, Madhava Radha, Madhava Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha, Giridhari Radha, Giridhari Shri Radhe. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. John Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajika Charishta Shri Shrimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki John Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajika Charishta Shri Shrimad Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Garantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki and take Gaura Premanandi. You got to close that curtain. Just like Okay, so we'll start by reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. The chapter is entitled The Price Affair, chapter 23, page 601. One of the boys asked whether there would be any receipt or written agreement. Swamiji had taught them to use receipts, at least amongst themselves. Gargamuni and Satsvarupa, as treasurer and secretary, signed each voucher, and Gargamuni kept the vouchers on file. These included requests for items like 50 cents for a hat and $3 for sneakers. Pramananda said he had mentioned a written statement to Mr. Price, but hadn't pressed the matter. Anyway, it wasn't necessary or even desirable, since they were not simply conducting business with Mr. Price, but cultivating a relationship. Mr. Price was a well-wisher, a friend, who was helping them as charity. He was going to do big things and use his influence to get the building. This $1,000 was just a gesture to show their interest and to show Mr. Price's friends. The devotees weren't joking. They had some money. In fact, the devotees had $10,000, $5,000 in small donations and $5,000 donation from a wealthy hippie. In addition to donations, the temple had a regular monthly income of $800. Ramananda's $400 paycheck from his job as a substitute teacher for the New York City public school system, and the $400 paycheck Satsvarupa earned as a caseworker for the welfare department. But the devotees were in no position to buy any building, and they knew it. All the more reason, Brahmananda explained at Ishtagoshti, why they had to depend on Mr. Price. After all, he reasoned, Swamiji himself had inspired them to look for a $100,000 building. Swamiji knew they couldn't pay for such a building, except in some extraordinary way. And Mr. Price, Brahmananda figured, must be the way. Swamiji wanted the building. No sooner had he reached San Francisco than he had written back, I am very anxious to hear about the final decision of the house. I wish to open the house by the 1st of March 1967, and arrangement may be done dexterously in this connection. The assembled devotees listened to Brahmananda's explanations, sympathized, and added their own understanding of how Krishna and Swamiji were working. There are a few contrary remarks and opinions, but basically everyone agreed. Brahmananda's dealings with Mr. Price were all right. When Kirtanananda and Raya Rama returned to New York from San Francisco, they consulted with Brahmananda. Then Brahmananda went to Mr. Price, who promised that if somehow they could get the building, he would return at least $750. The balance of the money represented travel and the devotees' interest. But they would get the building, Mr. Price assured them. I'll finish there. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, chapter 29. And to make up for the fact that there wasn't a class on this canto yesterday, I'll be reading from verses in purports 59 and 60. The chapter is entitled Talks Between Narada and King Prachinabharti. Starting with chapter 59. Iti Veda Vidang Vada Shruyate Tatra Tatraha Karmayat Kriyate Proktang Arokshang Na Prakashate. Translation. The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities. But practically is seen that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body? Purport. Atheists want evidence for the resultant actions of past activities. Therefore they ask, where is the proof that I am suffering and enjoying the resultant actions of past karma? They have no idea how the subtle body carries the results of the present body's actions down to the next gross body. The present body may be finished grossly, but the subtle body is not finished. It carries the soul to the next body. Actually, the gross body is dependent on the subtle body. Therefore, the next gross body must suffer and enjoy according to the subtle body. The soul is carried by the subtle body continuously until liberated from gross material bondage. In text 60. Nadatu vacha yenaiva rabhate karma tenaiva mutra tatpuman punkte yavya vadhanena lingena manasasvayam. Translation. The great sage Nadada continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. Purport. The living entity has two kinds of body, the subtle body and the gross body. Actually, he enjoys through the subtle body, which is composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. The gross body is the instrumental outer covering. When the gross body is lost, or when it dies, the root of the gross body, the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego, continues and brings about another gross body. Although the gross body apparently changes, the real root of the gross body is always there. The subtle body's activities, be they pious or impious, create another situation for the living entity to enjoy or suffer in the next gross body. Thus, the subtle body continues, whereas the gross bodies change one after the other. Since modern scientists and philosophers are too materialistic, and since their knowledge is taken away by the illusory energy, they cannot explain how the gross body is changing. The materialistic philosopher Darwin has tried to study the changes of the gross body, but because he had no knowledge of either the subtle body or the soul, he could not clearly explain how the evolutionary process is going on. One may change the gross body, but he works in the subtle body. People cannot understand the activities of the subtle body, and consequently, they are bewildered as to how the actions of one gross body affect another gross body. The activities of the subtle body are also guided by the supersoul, as explained in Bhagavad Gita 15:15. Sarvasya chahang hridi sanivishto matasmarte jnanam apohanang cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as Supersoul, is always guiding the individual soul always knows how to act according to the reactions of his past karma. In other words, the Supersoul reminds him to act in such a way. Therefore, although there is apparently a change in the gross body, there is a continuation between the lives of an individual soul. Ong Gyanatimurandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiv Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama. In this particular section of the Bhagavatam, we're hearing some very important information on an essential concept that everybody should know about as a practicing devotee, and that is information or knowledge on the transmigration of the soul. Not only is this outlined in the Srimad Bhagavatam here in multiple places, but it's outlined in the Bhagavad Gita as well. Transmigration, you can also use the term reincarnation as well interchangeably. Actually, I was thinking in reading this verse that this knowledge about transmigration of the soul, while you may read about it over and over, maybe even take it for granted, actually it has quite massive implications in a person's life. Whether you are a devotee or not, whether you are religious or not. This idea that once the gross body, the physical body, is finished, the soul moves on to another body through the medium of the subtle body, the mind, intelligence, and false ego. Depending on our actions within this life, we'll either get a better next life or a worse next life. Our actions in this life, as Prabhupada has mentioned, both pious and impious, good or bad, they leave impressions and even reactions in the subtle body, which then carry a person to the next gross body, one that's appropriate according to what they've done in their past life. In the Bhagavad Gita as well, 15.8, it's also explained, Sharirang yad avapnoti yachchap yutkramatishvaraha grahit vaitani sangyati vayorgandhan ivashayat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits to take another. It's also mentioned at the end of this section, the essential point that as long as we, the living entity, act for sense gratification, we will continue getting material bodies one after another. And Prabhupada mentions in this purport that scientists and philosophers today, they can't account for why there are different types of gross bodies, different species of life, because they aren't aware of the existence of the subtle body. So the example is given of Darwin. Darwin's theory was made on the premise that everything is matter. So to account for the different species of life, there must be some sort of evolution, not of consciousness, not of the subtle body, but an evolution or transformation of the gross body from one form to another. Hence the theory tells us originally we were like bacteria or something like that, or some sort of microscopic living entity, and then gradually that evolved into more complex forms of life, and monkeys, and then eventually into humans. So he was basing this theory on the premise that there's nothing beyond gross matter. So it's the body that is the gross bodies of one species evolves to another. But actually, the Bhagavad Gita clearly explains that the living entity changes from one body to another according to their mentality. It's also said in the Bhagavad Gita 13th chapter, text 22, Purusha prakriti stohi punkte prakriti jan gunan karanang guna sangosya sadasadyoni janmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil in various species. So according to the mentality that we acquire at the end of our lives, that mentality will determine where we go, what association that we find ourselves in, our family, our community, and the circumstances that we go through in our lives. If one acts like an animal in this life, as a human being, then naturally they'll get a suitable body in the next life, which facilitates their activities, which facilitates their mentality or desire. A person acts like a a dog in this life, they get a dog's body. They act like a cat in this life, they get a cat's body. And life, existence goes on like this. Body after body, life after life. We create, we condition different conditions for our subtle body, which takes us to another gross body. And things just go on this way. So as I was saying, this understanding is quite amazing, it's quite valuable, because it has massive implications in the lives of human beings today, and us as devotees also. So in society today, generally most people, religious or not, they're under the idea that we only live one life. There's no such thing as transmigration of the soul from one body to another. Yes, in Buddhism and Hinduism that's there, but in Western countries, Middle Eastern countries, Islam and Christianity, so on and so forth, their understanding is that we just live one life. At least if you're religious, there's a sense of accountability to a God. So therefore, within this life, you'll try your best according to the standards of your scripture to be a good person in the eyes of God. But in the absence of a God, in the absence of any accountability, actually things in society get very messy. There's this concept or this philosophical system of thought known as existentialism. Essentially, what it is that, yes, there's only one life, and this world, this universe, has no ultimate purpose behind it. Neither does your life. So it's your job to create your own meaning in a world without meaning, which is very interesting. It also implies here that human beings, whether they're given a purpose or not, whether they're given an ultimate overarching meaning to their life or not, still there's a need to have some meaning. Because actually, yes, there is a purpose to our existence. There's a purpose to bind everything that we see in this world. So the result of such a philosophy, existentialism, is that human beings today, internally, they experience complete and utter chaos. And externally, they also experience complete and utter chaos. In a world where everybody has to make their own meaning, naturally, you'll find people, individuals, groups who disagree with another group's meaning that they've chosen. Hence, that leads to conflict of interests and maybe even physical conflict, warfare. And just as an individual trying to navigate your way through this existence, without any overarching meaning to your life, whether spiritual or even just like having no purpose for your own material body and mind, then life is very confusing and bewildering. Many people, they go through their life ultimately taking on a purpose or a meaning that's given to them by society. They take on a career which may not necessarily be aligned with their psychophysical nature. If they're lucky, maybe it is, and then they do well. But for the most part, people, they're thrust into a career or forced to go through the education system. And there's no real understanding of what their inclinations are and what sort of occupation suits them psychophysically. So a lot of young people today, teenagers in their 20s, they find themselves disillusioned, confused. What am I supposed to be doing here in this world? I can't find anything that really aligns with who I think I am. Actually, yeah, even just to have some vague semblance of an understanding of who you are today in terms of your gender, in terms of your culture, that's actually very difficult to attain. So many people today, more and more so, as society becomes more individualistic, as people become more and more disconnected from their root cultures, so to speak, generation after generation, due to colonialization and westernization of the world, they become more and more confused, alone, and lost within this existence. So therefore, one philosopher, Albert Camus, he has this famous quote: "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy." In other words, in a world where there's no meaning, the real question that most people have to ask themselves is, should I commit suicide now? Or should I commit suicide later? Or should I die of natural causes? Because there's nothing before this life. There's nothing after this life. What's the point of it all? What's the point of living? Hence again, why lack of an understanding of transmigration of the soul, which is very scientifically explained in the Bhagavatam, can cause internal and external chaos. So what is a person to do with themselves? Those who were fortunate enough, or more fortunate, to be born in a Vedic society and who were intelligent, the intelligent non-devotee, so to speak, the karmis, having this understanding that there is life after this, they would aspire for the best next body possible. They would perform activities within this lifetime in order to attain some sort of position in the heavenly planets, where the enjoyment is much more vast, your lifespan is much longer, the opulences that you have, beauty, are much greater, and the pleasure that you can experience is much more intense. As devotees, thankfully, we've been given this information, and hence it prompts us, it compels us to not just consider it, but to also think about how we can apply this information in our life, how we can act on this information. I've lived many lives before. This current life that I'm living, it's one of millions. It's temporary. It is going to end. So how do I actually utilize this particular life to attain the best possible destination? How do I use this particular life to get out of the cycle of transmigration? That's the ultimate question that this knowledge should pose for us, should make us think about. And even so, there are many, I guess, other more personal, down-to-earth implications of this knowledge. One of the devotees in the ashram, when talking on this particular subject, he was rightly saying that just by knowing that we're transmigrated through so many bodies, it makes our current attachments to this body and mind seem much less significant. So this knowledge is actually quite relevant, even just in our day-to-day lives. For example, when we become proud, we can think to ourselves through the eyes of knowledge, the wisdom that we've been given through the Bhagavatam, that actually we've been living many lives, and the chances are very, very high, actually it's for certain you can say that in our last lives we were probably more well endowed with opulence, abilities, beauty, fame, wealth, strength than we have now. And that was gone. That's all gone now. There's a story in the Nectar of Instruction Prabhupada tells of one rich man who took very great care throughout his lifetime to accumulate wealth, to get a nice house for his family members, his wife and his children, his sons. And he happened to pass away, as everybody does. And in his next life, it was found that he was born as a cobbler. And as a cobbler, by chance, he happened to wander to where his sons were living, to the house that he had bought them in his previous life. And what did his sons do? They didn't greet him with love and affection. They didn't thank him for what he had done. They just saw that this is just a cobbler and that he shouldn't be here, so they beat him. So if you think about it, it's actually quite embarrassing. So to be proud about what we've been given in this life, these abilities which have been given by Krishna himself, by our, facilitated through our karma, these opulences, quote unquote, that we have, it's not very intelligent. This knowledge dispels this illusion that may pop up in the mind. Actually, we also understand that every living entity, when they first enter into the material world, they enter taking on the body of Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma is the creator of the universe. Whereas now we're existing on planet Earth in Kali Yuga as a human being with a shortened lifespan, with probably a speck of the creative abilities that Brahma has. How can we really be proud? We're just a speck of dust on a vast beach, so to speak, being overwhelmed by the ocean of time. Another thing that it can help us with, again, this knowledge on a more practical, down-to-earth level. Again, when we become attached, to our body and mind, then we start to think in terms of I and mine. This is my house, this is my property, these are my family members, my children, so on and so forth. This is my spot where I chant japa every day in the ashram. No one else is allowed to sit here. This knowledge is so helpful because it wakes us up to the reality that, again, whatever we have now, it's just temporary acquisitions. We're not going to have it forever. We're going to lose it eventually. One of the best examples that I can think of in this regard was the story of King Chitraketu in the Bhagavatam, 6th canto. Yeah, Chitraketu, very powerful Kshatriya, endowed with so much opulence, wealth, influence, fame, naturally as a king. He had one desire which he couldn't fulfill, and that was to have a son who could carry on the family line, who could perform the rituals so that the ancestors are able to achieve emancipation from a potential hellish existence, Pitra Yagya. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't have a son. It was said that he ended up marrying 10 million wives, which is inconceivable by today's standards, in an attempt to have a son. And each of them, to his dismay, were barren. So, in his dismay, in his depressed state, just so happened that Angira Rishi, I believe, friend of Narada Muni, comes along and sees him in this state, wanting to enlighten the king in transcendental knowledge initially, but he sees that the king isn't willing to listen because the king is just overly depressed over the fact that he can't have a son. So the king, requests a benediction from the rishi, asking for a son, to help him carry on the family line and perform the family duties when he himself retires. So yes, that benediction was given, as we all know. The wife who was able to give birth to the son, she ended up being favored by the king. Their relationship, was taken to another level. And all the other queens, 999 sorry. Anyway, my math isn't working right now, but all the other wives, they were neglected, and being neglected, they became envious, and by becoming envious, they decided to poison the child, the son born of the king. When this happened, and the queen found out, the king found out, King Chitraketu, of course, they were completely lost in an ocean of grief. It was said that as King Chitraketu was making his way towards the dead body of his son, he was falling over, he was fainting. When he eventually reached him, he just cried. And the whole kingdom, surrounding them were also extremely sad. They all cried with the king and the queen. And at that point, Narada Muni and his friend came down to enlighten the king. It was the opportune moment. And to cut a long story short, the boy was revived through Narada Muni's mystic potency. Actually, it was said that Narada Muni, he entered into the body of the little boy, and he spoke through the mouth of the little boy, hoping to enlighten the king that way. So when the boy came back to life, obviously the king was happy. He was over the moon, and he took the boy, in his arms, asking him, my boy, how are you? Aren't you happy to see your father after, us thinking that you were gone forever? And the son, he replies to the dismay of King Chitraketu, which father are you? And to the queen, which mother are you? As if to say, what she did go on saying actually, me, the soul, I've lived so many hundreds of lives, so many millions of lives. I've been wandering this material world since time immemorial. You're asking me, as your quote unquote son, how I am, if I'm happy to see you, but first tell me, which father are you out of the millions of fathers that I've had? Which mother is she out of the millions of mothers I've had? So many different bodies, demigod bodies, animal bodies. And that was enough to give King Chitraketu a wake-up call. Actually, I'm eternal soul beyond this body and mind. And my job in this world is not to, engage in material activity, material fruitive activity, but to attain self-realization. So yes, this knowledge is helpful for us because if we do, the tendency is always there to claim ownership over our possessions. We can think, actually, these possessions that have been given to me, again, by my karma, ultimately through the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for this one short lifetime, I might not even have them a whole lifetime. Instead of trying to be attached to them, claiming them as my own, I should instead rather use them in Krishna's service. So there are many other ways how this knowledge is helpful as well. One other way which I found important for me is when we are belittled. Again, when we're belittled, naturally the tendency is to want to defend our honor, to, out of false ego, trying to show people that actually know they're wrong. We're not what they think we are. We're better than they think we are. Than they think we are. But Prabhupada explains in the purport to one of the verses in the 13th chapter, in relation to thinking that we're this body, that this is the one and only life. He says that the material concept of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of a man in perfect knowledge, who knows that he is not this body, that this is just one lifetime amidst many, that this is just one body that I'm finding myself in, out of many bodies that I've already had, then anything, honor or dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. And the line that always strikes me, is quite deep, is where he says here, one should not be hankering after this material deception. So when we try to, we feel the false ego flaring up when we're belittled, which naturally happens, then we can think about this. This is just one lifetime in many. I'm not actually this body. So why should I be so attached to the quote unquote honor or dishonor that is given to this body? Actually, we see it as a result of our past karma, as we all know. Due to what I had done in a previous life, now I'm suffering the consequences in this life. So there's so many little practical implications that I was thinking about, looking at this knowledge, the transmigration of the soul. Yeah, but again, the ultimate question that we should be asking ourselves is, again, if we're transmigrating from body to body, life after life, we're becoming attached to things and then we're losing them, janma mrityu jara vyadi, then should we not do something about this? Should we not try to act in such a way that we can escape the cycle of birth and death? So near the end of the section, Prabhupada starts to emphasize again and again that ultimately, in the same way that through sense gratificatory activities, we implicate ourselves in future lives, future gross bodies, future karmic entanglement. Similarly, by Krishna conscious activities, we allow ourselves to become free from the cycle of birth and death. We allow ourselves to attain a spiritual body beyond the limitations of the material world. So the recipe is simple. Devotional service, hearing and chanting. These are the means by which we can attain a new life, the highest destination. So hearing is given a lot of importance as well. Janma karma chame divyam even yo veti tatvata tyaktva deham punaru janma naiti mamiti sojuna. In fact, if we just try to understand the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and the transcendental nature of Krishna's activities, we fill our minds with these things, we condition our subtle body through Krishna consciousness, then upon leaving the body, we don't take our birth again in this material world, but ultimately we attain the eternal abode. There are many examples in the Bhagavatam of people, devotees, who do go through different lives, and eventually, through proper means of acting, through hearing, even, they attain, the spiritual world. After one fail, we see Narada Muni, he was a Gandharva. He got proud and at a Sankirtan festival started chanting the glories of a demigod, and then was forced to become a Shudra. But through serving as a young boy some great sages, through eating their remnants, he was able to attain the spiritual body, that of Narada Muni himself. So these examples are given to show us how one mentality can shape our destiny in such a way that we get a certain type of birth in the next life. But another type of mentality, another created by a certain way of acting, can allow us to attain the highest destination in existence, i.e. the spiritual world. So yes, I thought this information that we received, this knowledge in this chapter, to be very important and very crucial, and also very helpful just on a practical down-to-earth level. But not to take up any more time, I'll finish there. Thank you for your attention. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or things to add? Corrections?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dandot Pranam.
Hare Krishna,
Thank you
Dandavat
so much
Pranam.
for explaining this text 59 and 60 about the importance of the transmigration which are in general people don't understand or don't try to understand or don't get the real information. Only Bhagavatam can give this information. And you explained this so nicely, how the transmigration happens. Even if we see that today's innovation by Darwin theory is goes completely opposite to what Bhagavatam is talking about. So Darwin theory is failed here. That doesn't work at all. And the uh, knowledge given in the Bhagavatam, that is what actually going through. That is the reincarnation is possible and it is happening. And how it happens? Due to the transmigration of the soul. So this information really impact us and give us the real knowledge so that we can transform our activities in this life suitably so that we can get a good body or good uh, life in the next. And by the way, by giving an importance to the subtle body, which is always with us. Here, Prabhupada says we have two kinds of body. One is gross body and subtle body. The most important is the subtle body. Gross body doesn't stay for long, but the subtle body remains forever. Whatever activities is done, it is recorded. As the plane carries the black box, whatever incident happens, it gets recorded on and on. Similarly, the subtle body is the recorder of all our activities, whether it is pious or impious, and according to the desire, we get the next body. So if our subtle body is engaged in Krishna consciousness, that will definitely help us to go through the next life in a better life, that is to Krishna Lok. So it is very important, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out, to train this subtle body, that is, which constitutes with the mind, intelligence, and ego, so that it can be properly used in the next life. So that is the knowledge is given over here. And you have given the examples how Narad Muni is changed his life from a poor family to a Muni stage. And we can see how Ambarish Maharaj was engaging his all subtle form of his body into the service of Krishna, so that in the next life he becomes the associate of Krishna. Similarly, Chitraketu's examples. So no matter what you try in this life, it is not going to help you in the next life unless and until and unless the subtle body is trained towards Krishna's bhakti, towards Krishna, then only life can be successful. So it is very important to understand that transmigration of the soul and reincarnation is possible. So this is the knowledge Srila Prabhupada is giving us through the example of talks between Narad Muni and King Prachin Barishad, who is trying to understand from Narad Muni. Thank you so much for explaining in details. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. I like the black box analogy too. I'll probably use that in outreach. So thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranams.
Thank you very much for pointing out the difference in approach between a non-devotee or the common member of a present-day society and a devotee, because the basic difference lies in the knowledge a devotee has, what is the purpose of life and what is his duty and what is the goal he has to achieve. He knows all that and he works for that. As against a non-devotee who doesn't know the purpose of life, and he thinks the body will end with the end of this life, and not body, he himself will be destroyed. And accordingly, he doesn't know it, gets frustrated often when he doesn't get the things in his favor. But the real knowledge lies that we know what is our, as a human being, we have been given the opportunity to understand that. So we should understand what is our purpose, what is our duty, and then try to achieve for that. And in this way, if we do Krishna consciousness, we can get the highest purpose of life and make our life successful. And you have very nicely explained it very emphatically about the different stages one goes and the nullity of or the futility of the Darwin's theory of evolution, which is Prabhupada has rejected it from the beginning. So thank you for bringing that point and explaining it very nicely. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Prabhuji, it appears there's no other person to make comments, so that you may conclude the class. Thank you for your class.
Thank you very much.
Rupyascha kripa sindhubhyo eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Praise Manobiram Prabhu Ki Jai. Jai. Hari Hari Bol.
All glories to the
Hare
single
Krishna.
devotee. Hare Krishna.
Krishna.